Hi guys, today we're going to talk about something a little different. And let me start by first of all explaining what we're going to talk about has nothing to do with politics. In fact, I'm not even going to discuss politics in this video. But we are going to give other examples of this. The topic, I've been thinking about this for a few days, and actually a few hours, and I came up with the topic. We're going to talk about bias today. Now, let me start by first of all answering one question right up front. Is your YouTube channel biased? Yes, it is. It is biased. Okay? In fact, I don't know anybody who does not have bias. Everything that we do has bias. So, regardless of who you are, you have a bias. What is bias? Let's start with that. Bias, in this case, I'm going to talk about two kinds of bias. They're really not that different. One is first-hand, and the second one is second-hand bias. Okay, first-hand bias, for this example. Let's say you and your friend Joe are sitting in history class. Joe is sitting in the seat before you, and he wants to pass a note to you. The note talks about that there's a football game after school, and he wants to know if you want to go. But he didn't get a chance to see you all day, so he decides to write you a little note during the exam and passes it back to you. The teacher, who doesn't know what the note's about, receives a notice from a girl named Susie that a note was passed between you and Joe. Now, you and Joe, for this example, are not doing anything really wrong, but the teacher thought, and so did Susie, that you were cheating on the exam. So, the teacher calls you both out, sends you to the principal's office. The principal, here's the teacher's statement of why she's sending you to the principal's office. The principal asks you why you are at the principal's office. And you say, because Joe said to ask me in a note if I was going to go to the after-school football game during the exam. Now, I know what you're going to say is, well, passing notes in school is bad anyway, right? So maybe that's why you thought you were going to go into the principal's office. Joe, who had heard that Susie thought they were cheating because she saw him pass the note to you, said, well, Susie thought I was giving Michelle or Jimmy or whatever your name is information about the exam that we're taking. So she told the teacher that she thought that I was passing cheats back to you, but they weren't, okay? The teacher accepts the note, and then it sees it's about the football game. Now, the teacher, of course, who did not know it was about the football game, her opinion, they got 4 opinions here, okay? You got yours, you got Joe's, you got Susie's, and you got the teacher's. 4 opinions, same situation. Now, because they're different, okay, now, in this case, every one of you has a different view. So because you all have a different view to a topic, you might be asking, which one of you is telling the truth? What if the answer is, in this case, you all are? Not one of you is incorrect. You're all talking about the same thing. You're all talking about it from different perspectives. But it's all the same story. It's just each person has different views of it. Now, for as the principal is concerned, since he is getting this information not from personal experience, he isn't there at the time of the note passing, all he's hearing is 4 different views of the same story. So he has to make a decision, is say, Jimmy and Joe cheating on the exam? Or is Jimmy and Joe in violation of no passing policies in the school? Should Jimmy and Joe be allowed to retake the exam that they lost the ability to take because of the no passing? Should a teacher give them an F in her grade book? Or even a big 0, which is even worse? So, given the fact that he has to listen to 4 different tales, 4 different accounts of the same story, he now has to make a decision based on those 4 accounts. He's making his decisions based on second-hand bias. That is, he was not physically there. Okay? Now, that sounds confusing enough. But now, when we talk about the big situation with modern media, and I am going to bring this up. And no, I'm not talking about politics. We're leaving that out. We're going to come up with another story instead. A very common example in the wintertime. A mother is driving on Route 44 in Winston. She doesn't see that there's a patch of black ice on the road. She hits the patch of ice. She swerves out of control. She smashes into the guardrail. Okay, the mother and the kids are fine. The kids are in the back seat, all have their seatbelts on. Okay? Newspaper A gets the scene. They talked to a few people, but they didn't get every piece of information because, unfortunately, there was not enough information because the injured people, the passengers of the car, are at hospital, and so that there was no way that they could directly interview those people. So they talked to the police chief, or the police officer on the scene. They get a story, they get a report, okay? And at the same time, they talk to someone. This is sort of score out of control. So they would rightfully say the car hit a patch of ice. But why did it hit the patch of ice? Well, somebody else the newspaper may say is she was distracted and she didn't see the ice was right in front of her. Okay, then why was she distracted? We don't know that. We just know is she hits a patch of ice, smashes into the guardrail, the car is totaled, and that's it. But she's fine. She's at hospital. So now, the next problem is we need to talk to her. Newspaper B happens to do just that. They go to the hospital. They find out the whole story. She was distracted. Her kids are arguing with each other in the back seat. She turned around to tell the kids to shut down, be quiet, while she tries to make sure to drive safely because she knows that it's the black ice on the road. She lost concentration and her front tires skid out on the ice, and then she slammed into the guardrail because she lost control of the wheel. So now, if you listen to the first story, you just know that she hit a patch of ice, smashed into the guardrail, and that was the story that the editor ran to print. But we don't know why she was distracted. Editor B sees the same story, plus obviously the police report, plus reports from witnesses, and says the mother whose 2 children were misbehaving in the back seats distracted her. She turned around to tell her kids to pipe down because she had to make sure that she was going to be able to drive safely on a road that had black ice patches. She did not see the black ice patch in front of her tire. She spun out of control and she smashed into the guardrail. The family is safe. They went to hospital. No serious injuries. Airbags were deployed. Everybody's okay. But the car is still totaled. Okay? Now, it's same thing happens in the media. But what happens in the media also is another thing. Newspapers, and especially since the 1980s, with the creation of cable television, there has been a huge influx of channels specifically oriented towards the news. And what has happened is they're now vying for ratings. There's only so many eyeballs and ears that you can speak to. And unfortunately, they do something else to make their story sound great. They sensationalize. Now, sensationalism isn't really a new thing. It's existed since the beginning of the newspaper. All the way back when the first newspaper came up, there was always sensationalism. When sensationalism happens, it's not because the media is necessarily trying to inflate a story. They're just trying to get your eyeballs. Ever read the headlines in the newspaper? Especially the one on the front page? The one that you see when you first pick the newspaper up? It always seems to be so drastic. And then you actually read it, you find the story isn't quite as bad as it made. For example, if you were to read the newspaper article over this car accident from newspaper A, it would say is, distracted woman smashes into guardrail on Route 44. Newspaper B, kids distract mother and she loses control. Now, in this case, second one, kids distract mother and she loses control. What in the hell does that mean? Lost control of what? Her temper? No, she lost control of the car. She left out the word car. And now it makes you think she lost control of her temper or her demeanor. And see what I'm saying? So, in other words, but which newspaper are you likely to go pick up at the newsstand? If you don't have any particular preference, you're probably going to pick up newspaper B because it sounds more exciting. It's the same news story. It's just that they have more detail. But because the headline was written the way it was, it sounds more exciting. But it's not. It's the same story. But they do have additional pieces of information. They have the witnesses. Plus they have the police person on call. And they have the fire brigade. And they have the issue with the... they have the personal interview of the mother. And maybe even the interviews with the kids. Okay, the point is they have more information. But because that headline sounds as we would call clickbait, you're going to fall for it. You're going to go for that one. Not saying that newspaper A was wrong, but newspaper A kind of didn't go into enough detail. Ever since the beginning of the human being, one of the things that we have is an opinion. We always seem to think about things and say, well, that's not what I was told. Really? What were you told? Oh, I was told it was this reason and that she was taking too many Thorazine or prescription medications and she was drowsy at the wheel. But that's not what the story said. The story said that she just was distracted and only hit a patch of ice. It didn't say anything about prescription medications. Or unprescribed prescription medications. It doesn't say that. So, because newspaper A didn't go into enough detail, you might think that. But when you read newspaper B, it explains that her two children, which are getting rowdy in the back seat, and she turned around to tell them to pipe down, and thus her eyes were off the road. So now, the Thorazine story don't make any sense in newspaper B. But then newspaper A never said anything about prescription medications either. So, what I'm saying is opinion, bias, it all goes together. Yes, indeed, it's real. But because, as I said, once we went into this new era of cable television, videos, networks, everything, there's only so many eyeballs. So sometimes networks, to make the story sound so much better or more juicy, sensationalized titles and clickbait. Yes, they do it. Do I? Yes, I do. Do I do it? But let's be honest here. Everybody does to some extent because everybody has an opinion. And I'm not trying to say that it's good, it's right, it's just is the way it is. In the case of any particular news correspondent, you're gonna get bias. It doesn't matter if the person could be trying their damnedest to be the least biased person in the world. Bias creeps in. You learn that in journalism. You learn it. It's a fact. It's never going to change. The same thing in any other subject. History, science, journalism, same deal. Anytime human people have to make an opinion based on facts, they're going to give you a bias report. And that's the reason why let me give some suggestions of how we can help counteract that bias. In this example, I would read both newspaper A and newspaper B. And then take the two newspapers with the facts and put them together in my brain and process it and see is maybe newspaper A did not interview the family and they didn't have all the story. Maybe that's why newspaper B is got more facts. So newspaper B, does that make newspaper B right? No, it's the same story. It's just that they have more additional information than newspaper A. Well, the same is true when you're dealing with the media outlets. But there's a lot more than 2 newspapers and media outlets covering stories often, especially big headline ones. And so when you have to realize in a busy day, the average person is not going to sit there and read newspaper A, B, C, D, E. They're not even going to read 2 newspapers. More than likely, they're going to read 1. And like I said, it's probably going to be either the newspaper that they trust more than the other one. Even though they may be reporting the same story, but the reporters sometimes are just as biased too. So unfortunately, certain facts may be left out by a reporter because he's like, oh, everybody should know that. No, not necessarily. Not everybody knows that. But because he thought everybody knew that, that's where things get twisted and crazy. But okay, so let's talk about this one. In my case, my channel. I want to bring this back to my channel for a second. Do I try to find the facts for stories in multiple angles? Yes, I do. But I am biased. Okay? And I cannot help that I am biased. I am not Mr. Spock. I am not a Vulcan. I am a human being. Sorry, I am illogical, as Mr. Spock would say. I am illogical. Why? Because I'm a human being. I have an opinion. Everybody has one. And because I have an opinion, and certain stories to me make me excited, and certain stories make me go, meh. Guess what? The stories that excite me are the ones that are going to get my attention. And unfortunately, often enough, because they seem so one-sided to you, because I'm only quoting one source in the story instead of 2 or 3. Well, the news wires do the same thing. When they go into the newspapers or to radio or television or any internet, people only get quoted sources from one story. They don't quote sources from 5 or 6 stories for news sites. No news sources. They just do one. So because it all breaks down to, just like I said, the one source thing, as I call it. Say, for example, you were getting the report for newspaper A, and then you send it out on, say, to Associated Press or Reuters. They're going to report your story in their other local newspapers that choose to carry it. Okay? Because they're going to taking your story. Newspaper B decides instead to release a story onto the newswire, say to the other newswire. Say, for example, the Associated Press. Now, so Reuters for newspaper A, Associated Press for newspaper B. What's the problem here? Again, the same story, 2 different newswires being picked up and retransmitted by their associated newspapers, and the whole thing gets totally out of control as local editors add their own views to both stories, and then all of a sudden, the original story gets totally twisted. It's scary, but it happens. But remember, here's the main issue. I always say this, and I'm still going to stand behind this 1,000%. If you really have doubt on the news story, especially thanks to the internet, it's easy enough now to go back and look at multiple sources. You don't have to just depend on a source A or source B. You can probably, if there was a third newspaper in the story. Maybe a third newspaper, however, didn't actually show up at the scene, but talked to the people after the accident. And so they have another source. The first thing I would do is I'd look at source A, source B, and source C. And I would do the same thing and ask myself given all the different stories, different views, who's right? Just like in a passing example. Now, Joe has his opinion, you have your opinion, Susie has her opinion, the teacher has her opinion. Now, obviously, somebody has to make a decision based on the opinions of 4 people. In this case, it would be the principal, who's going to decide if you and Joe are going to be able to retake the exam, or if the teacher, by default, is going to give you a big fat 0 for not taking the exam. And that's where things get complicated. It's the same thing with when you judge and juries and hearing testimony. It's complicated. So bias is not a simple, thing. And as I said, I'm not even going to talk about political spin. I'm leaving that out. You guys can take it where you can take that for a grain of salt. But what I do as a commentator, I will do my best to find multiple sources of a story if I can. If I can find multiple sources of the same story, I will look at multiple sources. If I can't, I can't. Okay, it doesn't mean that I'm wrong. Maybe again, source A only released the story and source B didn't talk about it. Or source B turns out that they're also quoting source A. So that means in that case you only get source A. See, it means that what the question is what if you can go back to the original source A story, which came over the wire, and find out who really said it, and then maybe get in contact with that reporter and ask the reporter directly to give you a quick scoop on what's going on. That's another option. But your average person's not going to do that. And so that's where all of this stuff goes on. All right, so I hope you enjoyed this little tutorial, and I will see you soon. Stay out of trouble. Until later. Bye-bye.